All right, we'll call this meeting to order of the Rent Stabilization Commission meeting for August 10th, 2017. Could you please stand and follow me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Can we just make sure that we have our microphones on, everyone? And can we have a roll call, please?
Yes. It's going to be out of order because I can't find my paper. Commissioner Buckles? Present. Commissioner Gregoire?
Present.
Commissioner Maggio?
Present.
Chair Kerpes?
Here.
Vice Chair Bergstein?
Here.
Commissioner Charity?
Here.
Commissioner Topchin?
Here.
Thank you.
Has everyone had a chance to review the agenda?
I move approval. Second.
All those in favor? Say
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Approval of the minutes. Have we had a chance to review the minutes for the last meeting?
Yes. Move approval. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, minutes are approved. And Madam Secretary, do we have any public comments for this evening? We do not. All right. We'll move into the Director's Manager's Report.
Good evening, Chair, members of the Commission. This evening you do have one appeal, and we have an announcement of the security deposit interest, and then you have your priorities that you set at the last study session. The next meeting will be held on August 24th, and we are scheduling information on smoke-free rent stabilization units. It's a discussion forwarded by Commissioner Bergstein, Vice Chair Bergstein. And your next meeting after that, I should mention that there is a special event on September 5th. Please make a note on your calendars. It is a mandatory training. All advisory board members and commissioners will be here in council chambers on September 5th. And this is to cover Code of Conduct, the Brown Act, Robert's Rules of Order, and how to conduct a meeting. This is part of your regular training schedule. So all commissioners and board members that are in town are expected to attend. Please let me know if you have other plans, if you're going to be out of town, if there's other a situation or issues that you really cannot attend. Please let me know. We do not have any other appeals scheduled at this time. The look ahead has the meetings for September the 14th and the 28th on it, and we will populate that with appeals as they come in. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Do you have any questions for the manager? All right, seeing none, we'll go into commissioner comments.
Comment? Just would like to apologize to the Commission for my unexpected absence last week. I managed to throw out my back horseback riding. Was a bit immobile, but I have studied the results of the study session, and will hopefully be up to speed pretty quickly. That's all.
How's the horse?
Horse is fine, as he always is.
Any other comments?
I just wanted to, again, thank staff for our study session. I particularly appreciated having all the staff come in, and even those who were not really chatty conversationalists. We heard something from everyone, and we don't see staff that often, behind the counter people, so it really was just, for me, it was a really lovely touch to have staff come and reintroduce themselves and talk a bit about their history with the city and why they love working here. So I wanted to thank Director Noonan for arranging for that.
All right, no other comments? All right, that brings us to our appeal this evening. Do we have representatives for the appeal D4212 for 826 Westbourne Drive in the audience? All right, thank you. And we'll start with a staff report, please.
Thank you. Tenant Sean Bates has lived in Unit F at 826 Westbourne Drive since 1997. He currently pays rent of $1,055.75 $1,055.75 a month. He applied for a determination of the maximum allowable rent, or MAR, as well as a determination of whether the landlord has retained rent in excess of that MAR. The hearing examiner found that the tenancy had not been re-registered as the RSO requires, and so determined that the MAR was the initial rent of $745 per the lease. And that is going to be the MAR until the landlord repays the overcharges and re-registers the unit. On appeal, the landlord doesn't dispute that the tenancy was not re-registered. He also does not dispute that the rent was increased beyond the initial rent of $745. Instead, the landlord claims that the tenant, Sean Bates, is not who he claims to be, and that his limited English prevented him from establishing those facts at the hearing. Staff recommends that the Commission affirm the hearing examiner's decision. There's ample, undisputed evidence supporting the conclusion of the hearing examiner, and moreover, Mr. Osorio was represented at the hearing by counsel, who was able to communicate his client's arguments with the hearing examiner and never expressed any trouble in communicating with his client or the hearing examiner. And there was also no evidence that Mr. Osorio could not understand the testimony or the nature of the proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff this time? No questions? I have a question about, there's listed Exhibit 4, the rental agreement, but it wasn't in our packet. Have you seen the rental agreement by any chance?
Yes, I have, and the initial rent is what is reflected there, yes.
One of my question actually goes to the relevance of whether it, the identity had any relevance, because I couldn't tell if they both moved in together or if they didn't, and
They were both on the lease.
Okay.
Right.
thank you.
So does that mean that the standing issue wouldn't have merit even if there was a, sort of identity switching issue going on?
Well, I'm not sure what the argument was exactly because it wasn't fleshed out. The hearing examiner found that there wasn't really evidence to move forward, but I think the argument might be that the original tenant moved out before the current tenant, and therefore the landlord would have been eligible to raise the rent to market rate separate and apart from the re-registration issue.
Okay.
But that's kind of speculation on my part.
But the unit hasn't been re-registered at all since 1997.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay, could we start with, the appeal was filed by Mr. Osorio, present? Are you Mr. Osorio?
No, I'm not. That's Mr. Osorio.
Okay.
I am his counsel, Wilfredo Trevino Perez. How are you?
Good. Could you say your name one more time?
Wilfredo Trevino Perez.
All right. Mr. Perez, we're going to give you, you have 5 minutes to present your side. You can save some of that for rebuttal. Would you like us to time you so that you can spend a certain amount now and then we'll give you a certain amount after?
I think what I have to say is fairly quick.
Okay. We'll just divide it like 3 to 2?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Let's do 3 minutes.
Okay.
First of all, I apologize, and I can understand the back injury. I suffered a back injury. I crushed 2 vertebrae, and I'm on pain management. I asked to continue the hearing. I presented doctor's notes, and I didn't even get a call from Mr. Noonan, and it was denied. So I'm kind of loopy right now. I'm on medication. I'll have an epidural on Friday, next Friday. And so anyways, my client is the landlord to the premises at issue. A Sean Bates did in fact sign the agreement. However, a Sean Bates that signed the initial agreement is not the Sean Bates who today claims to be Sean Bates. I don't know what has happened. We had an expert, Bart Beggett, and I have a declaration from our expert. Take a look at the agreement. Take a look at the hearing application for this procedure here. All of the checks that were paid, and he has come to the conclusion that a different individual signed the initial lease agreement. My client only dealt with the imposter Bates, let's call him that. And so this Sean Bates apparently produced driver's license and other identifying information. However, the hearing examiner did not allow my client to present the evidence that would have demonstrated that this is not the same Sean Bates he leased to. As a matter of fact, there was snickering and kind of ridiculing of my client throughout that process. Now, there's some misstatements that, today. Mr. Bates, who is present, is not the same Mr. Bates that has been living there since 1997. It was someone else, and that person died. 2, the unit was re-registered, and there is a letter, I don't know if council has this letter, August 19, 1997. It's signed by Clyde Ross, lead counselor, rent stabilization.
Excuse me, did your client submit this during the hearing?
All of this was presented at hearing, and for some reason, and I read the decision, and I spoke to counsel that was present that day, and pretty much it was, as soon as he walked in, it was almost ridiculing how he says it's not the same Sean Bates, and it was like a running joke that day, was not taken serious at all. Other misstatements. The 2 parties, as you indicated earlier, were not on the lease. The only person on the lease is Sean Bates. I have the rental agreement here that was also presented. And it's not that someone moved out, it's that someone died. I think it's very, very, very simple. The writing expert, document expert, has looked at various documents. We have that. We just were not allowed to present that. And I read the rules today that we can present them today, and I would like you all to take a look at that declaration and tell us what is going on. This person, any statements he will say will be hearsay statements.
So your 3 minutes is up for now, and then we'll have 2 minutes for you to rebut after the.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I have a question.
Questions?
I'm sorry, you mentioned something about a 1997 letter that shows the re-registration. That's not in our packet. Council, was that not included at the hearing?
It was not presented at the hearing.
Okay,
no.
thank you. So that would be new evidence. We can't look at that tonight.
Is it your contention that it was presented at the
It's my
hearing?
contention that it was. I spoke to the council that was there, and really from the get-go, nothing that he would say. It was almost, you're offending, you're harassing him. He wants to grieve his spouse that died, and that's fine, we understand that. But the truth of the matter is that it was re-registered, we had the information, and it wasn't allowed in. Number 2, any information as to the mistaken or the imposter or the forgery was not allowed. It was, we saw the driver's license, and that's good enough for us.
What do you think the implication of a different identity would be?
I have my guess. I think what it is that an individual who was known to Mr. Bates at the time did not have proper credit, maybe, utilized his information to get in. After a while, I believe, they became married, and he moved in after about a year.
But for this hearing, what is your contention that if it is not actually the real Mr. Bates?
It's not the real Bates. It was re-registered. We do have that letter. I know that Mr. Bergstein said that that is new evidence. We're saying it is not new evidence. It is evidence that we've always had, and whether you have it or not. And then I'm kind of surprised that the city wouldn't have their own letter. This is a letter from the city, dated August 19, 1997, and it says right here, this notice is to confirm that the current maximum allowable rent for 826 Northwestern, and then it says here that this is based on the re-registration. I have the letter.
I have actually a question for staff. Can I ask quickly? How did this come about? Was it a city investigation into re-registered units? Was it the tenant complaining to the city that he was being charged improperly because the unit wasn't re-registered?
I don't know.
Okay.
I can tell you.
Okay.
Okay, so the other presumed Sean Bates passed away. My client actually had a great relationship with that person. When he passed away, the other gentleman was still there. My client says, okay, you're not on the lease. We're going to have to renegotiate or something, whatever he said. And then he turned around and filed the application for a hearing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
If we could have the tenant, Mr. Bates, please come to the, hi. And you'll have 5 minutes to present your side.
Thank you very much. You can kind of see what I've been going through, this harassment. My husband died a year ago from AIDS, a battle with AIDS, and we moved out here in 1997, my husband and I. That's over 21 years ago. And we've lived only at 826 Westbourne. We moved out here together. We saw the apartment together. I signed the lease. And that my husband was working because he got transferred out here with R.R. Donnelly. And when we moved out here, we saw the apartment together, and I signed the lease. We've lived there together this whole time. At the hearing, they brought up my identity. I have presented my licenses, passports, newspaper clippings when I was a Boy Scout, when I was a kid. I'm Sean Bates. This whole outlandish thing is just an owner occupancy eviction. He's trying to force me out because I'm rent controlled. And he sent me a letter that he wouldn't take my checks the day my husband died. On the day my husband died, he sent that. And I have not been able to grieve for him because I've been having to deal with this harassment. And I'm just asking that you comply with the city code and hold Mr. Osorio in compliance with registering the apartment. That's the only issue here. That should be the only issue here. My identity or dragging my husband's name into question to promote an owner occupancy eviction is unfathomable. And just please see the tenant side. If you need any information, I have it. I'm Sean. I signed the lease, and we rented the apartment together. And I really don't know what else to say. That's it, if you have any questions.
And your husband's name is?
John Slade.
John Slade.
Yes.
And you were present during the hearing, correct?
I was.
Do you recall either the property owner or his representative introducing a letter or attempting to
They
introduce?
introduced no evidence at all.
Let me finish my question.
I'm sorry.
Introduce a letter in reference to or stating that it claimed that they had re-registered the apartment?
No.
Okay.
There was nothing. There was nothing introduced.
Thank you.
And you obtained and presented this death certificate, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
You did that. Thank you.
And you're contending this is the owner's trying to occupy your unit, or the owner
I think
is
he's
merely trying to
harass
move you
me
out?
I think he's trying to harass me to force me out.
Are there any other questions? All right. Thank you very much, and you can have a seat. And sir, if you'd like to come back, and you have 2 minutes.
Yes, he just indicated that he and his husband were living there since the beginning. I actually have a letter, a cease and desist letter that was sent to me by Stimpert and Ford, an attorney for Mr. Bates here, that indicates that Sean Bates was the original person there, and then I'm sorry, I forget the name of the others. Mr. Slade moved in sometime after, so even his statement today does not reflect what his attorney is saying are the true facts. And, I don't know if it was Mr. Slade that moved in first. All I can tell you is that he moved in under the name Sean Bates, signed his name as Sean Bates, and we have that signature. We have that signature on the agreement today. We have various checks, and we have the signature for this hearing today. Experts do this all the time. They looked at the signatures and they said it's not the same person. And we have the declaration under penalty of perjury.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any questions for either of the tenant or the property owner or staff?
We could get an explanation on the signature.
Is that a question you have for staff?
Yeah, could we, the signature itself, how can that be explained?
I'm not sure what you mean. What signature?
Was it Mr. Slade's signature or Mr. Bates' signature
On what?
on that document that was just discussed.
The lease was signed by Mr. Bates.
I think the hearing examiner accepted that as well.
All right.
But I think that, as I recall reading, there was an indication that Mr. Bates' signature had changed, and he acknowledged over the years. So his contention is that the discrepancy between signatures is accounted for because his signature has changed, not because it's a different person.
That's kind of what I've just sort of a clarification as to how that is.
Are there any other questions for staff before we go into deliberations? I have one question. I just want to clarify, not that our discussion necessarily needs to even revolve around whether the second signature was there or not, or the second person was there or not. It was my understanding when two people moved in together and one person moved out, that doesn't change the anything. Maybe when a new roommate moves in, that might be come into question, but.
No, you're correct.
So even if, I'm not saying that was the case, but even if the argument that appears that the owner is trying to make were to be true, that one person was the other, at the end of the day, the MAR would still be the 1997 rate.
Correct.
Thank you.
Regardless.
If we don't have any other questions, then we'll go into deliberations. May I address that last? No, I'm sorry. Thank you. So we'll go ahead and begin, if anyone would like to start.
Well, for me, I think given that the material facts are undisputed, and I think the hearing examiner's decision is reasonably supported by the record of evidence. So for what I see here, I will support the recommendation.
I'd have to agree. We would need evidence to show that the hearing examiner's decision was clearly in error, and we just don't have that. On the other side, we have a government-issued ID showing that the gentleman is Sean Bates, and we have a Sean Bates that signed the lease agreement. So I don't see that the evidence presented at the hearing examination was so overwhelmingly misinterpreted by the hearing examiner that we can overturn that decision.
I will say that I'm concerned, not because I believe one person over another, but I am concerned that the landlord claims to have documentation of a re-registration of the apartment at the appropriate time in 1997 and claims that that information was presented at the hearing. I'm not saying that that happened or that it didn't happen, but we have a lot of differing opinions, and it seems like that's the underlying fact here. And so I would remand the case and have a new examination of the evidence.
So, just so I understand, so based upon the information that was brought up this evening about the letter from the city confirming, to the property owner confirming that they had re-registered in February or whatever month, 1998 or 97, that would be, you'd want the hearing examiner to review that?
I would say, based on what seems like some very uncommon inconsistencies in the statements between the parties, and it seems possible to me that the hearing examiner wasn't, or all of the parties weren't given the opportunity to fully present their case, and or the hearing examiner did not receive all of the information that could be relevant, and therefore I'd want, in the interest of justice, for there to be a new hearing on this.
Just to comment on that, I would offer the counter argument that is determined, that's an issue between the party and their attorney. That party was represented by competent counsel, and if that counsel did not make sure that evidence wasn't on the record, then that would be an issue for that client to take up with their counsel, but not for us to do that lawyer's job for them.
Well, but I'm not sure that that's, the attorney is saying that it was presented, and so I'm not sure. Look, maybe yes, maybe no, but it concerns me that the evidence appears to be out there, and it may have been out there, and it may not have been reviewed, and so I would, as I said, I would remand for a full evaluation.
I would disagree, I'm sorry. I have great faith in our hearing examiner. She runs a fairly tight ship, and if there had been evidence presented during the hearing, it would be in our record. So everything that's being talked about tonight by counsel for the landlord is irrelevant to this hearing. We cannot consider it all new evidence. And I said I do have great faith in our hearing examiner. I don't think that there was a mistake that, oh, I forgot to include this in the record. I didn't discuss that. I don't believe that hearing examiner was snickering and making fun and disregarding either parties. I said I have great faith in our staff. As far as the landlord's inability to understand due to a language issue, I don't put any weight to that. That's the landlord's responsibility to speak the language of the tenant in question, and if they can't communicate adequately to find someone for all business dealings who does speak the language. You know, I am a landlord, and I speak English fluently, a little French, a little Hebrew, and that's all the language like my little brain can handle. So when I've had to deal particularly with Spanish-speaking employees, I've brought someone in who can translate what I'm trying to say, and they can translate back to me. That's my responsibility as a business owner. So I don't bear any credence to any language barriers on this. And again, I have utmost respect and faith for our hearing examiner. I don't believe that anything was left out. I would not support remanding this. Although I hear your concerns, I would not support remanding this. I would support affirming this decision.
I do too have concerns to hear a party say that there was a document that was presented at a hearing but doesn't appear in the record. However, I've looked through the record, and I don't see any evidence that that document was actually presented. I also look at the appeal document that was filed, and there's no reference in the appeal to the hearing examiner not making reference to a key piece of evidence. If that was in fact a basis for appeal, that should have been listed on the appeal document. So therefore, I'm not going to repeat the arguments my other commissioners have made, but I will be supporting staff's recommendation tonight to affirm the hearing examiner's decision in this case.
Chair Corpus, I agree with most of the commissioners. The examiner's findings and conclusions are supported by the evidence, and I didn't see any record of it that the landlord was unable to submit anything for the record. So I trust the process was very clear, and therefore I'm going to support the staff's recommendations to affirm the hearing examiner's decision in this matter.
Thank you. Can I ask one question, Council? I know sometimes you have an opportunity and you actually listen to the entire recording. By any chance, did you do that in this case?
I did not, no. But I will point out that it was a Ricardo Chavez who was at the hearing. It was a different attorney for the landlord.
Yes, thank you. So I agree with most of my colleagues up here. This would be highly unusual for a piece of evidence to be attempted to be introduced and to have our hearing examiner not even mention it in the staff report or in her final summary of the case. The only reference I see in the appeal document that, and I'm only I'm kind of making the connection in my own head. It's not that I've heard that there's any argument supporting this, but in it, the property owner says, this hearing should not have moved forward as I was precluded from entering any counter evidence into the record. I don't know what that evidence was. It doesn't explain it here. It could have just been a general statement. It does concern me that, granted I haven't seen the document, but a document was held up during this hearing with a date and from the city confirming the re-registration, or allegedly confirming the re-registration. My question would be then why it wasn't submitted, but that was already answered in the testimony that they had tried to submit it and it wasn't allowed. Without hearing, again, that would go against all previous practices by what we've seen or understood to have occurred in any of our hearings prior to, or the ones that I've sat on the appeals board to. The fact that that argument, or that nobody, I have issue with that as well. However, I think what Commissioner Charity had mentioned with the fact that the individual was represented by counsel, I feel that there could have been other steps taken, or that the attorney would have been more aggressive about it, would have maybe wrote a letter immediately following the hearing, whatever it was to document that this had occurred. And I don't see that in this case. I just see that very general, precluded from entering any counter evidence into the record, which basically was addressed in the hearing examiner's final report more broadly, in that that people were saying that, the identity, there was a question of identity, but no evidence was submitted. So I could easily just make the same argument that the precluded from entering any evidence was the fact that she didn't believe that the identity was an issue. So I'm a little torn on that, but overall, I don't think that there's enough evidence to provide to us that would discredit the hearing examiner's final decision either. So I would also support affirming the hearing examiner's decision in this case. Is there any more comments, or would like to take a vote?
I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion to adopt resolution RSC 17-510, a resolution of the Rent Stabilization Commission of the City of West Hollywood affirming the hearing examiner's decision in application D-4212.
Second.
Who seconded that?
I did.
Oh, okay.
Or did we do it in unison?
No, I heard you. I just wasn't sure. All right. All those in favor of the motion, please
Roll
say aye.
call.
Oh, roll call
Roll
vote,
call.
please. Thank you.
Commissioner Buckles,
Nay.
Commissioner Gregoire,
Aye.
Commissioner Maggio,
Aye.
excuse me, Chair Kerpies,
Aye.
Vice Chair Bergstein,
Aye.
Commissioner Charity,
Aye.
Commissioner Topshin.
Aye.
All right, the motion passes. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask staff, but this issue has been resolved. Now we'll move on to new business. I lost my agenda. The first one is announcement of the 2017 security deposit interest rate.
We have Chris Usler
Oh.
here to give you that report.
Good evening, Commissioners. The rent stabilization ordinance requires landlords to pay their tenants interest on the deposits that they're holding. The interest is owed in January for the previous calendar year. The interest rate is determined by taking the interest rates paid by 5 local banks on regular savings accounts as of July 1, averaging those rates and rounding them to the nearest 0.25%. On July 1st, 2017, the interest rates were these: Bank of America, 0.01%, Wells Fargo, 0.01%, Citibank, 0.01%, One West Bank, 0.15%, US Bank, 0.01%. The average rate is 0.038%, and rounded to the nearest 0.25% results in an interest rate of 0. This is the 6th year in a row that the formula has given us an interest rate of 0%, and it's unclear if that's going to change anytime soon, certainly, but it's been now for 6 years that we've required 0% interest.
Question. Chris, why do we round it to the nearest 1/4? Why don't we just allow what the banks are giving?
Because that's what the law says. That was the law that was passed. There was litigation in 2003, I believe, regarding this issue, and the settlement of this litigation resulted in this formula and this approach.
And it's the formula we have been using 6 years or all along?
Pardon me, I didn't hear you.
The formula has been used only 6 years or all along?
No, the formula prior to that was taking the interest rate paid on a 6-month certificate of deposit of $1,000. And those rates were averaged, which came up to a higher rate. And again, the result of the litigation was instead of using the 6-month CD rate, using the regular savings book passbook rate, savings passbook.
Just curious, that litigation, was that a case against the city of West Hollywood, or was that so it was not a statewide case?
Right, it was just against us.
Thank you.
And how long are we required to follow that settlement?
That's the question I can't answer. That's something that attorneys would have to answer.
Because that answers my question about, I was going to be asking this evening about when's the last time this has been reviewed? Isn't there another way we could formulate this? Because I get a higher than 1% interest rate on my savings, but that's because I choose a different bank other than those. Any
Chris,
other
under this, the landlords are not required to do anything in terms of notifying the tenants.
Right. We send out as part of our January mailing, to all tenants and landlords, what the percentage is. Prior to the zero rate, we would send out a form, as some of the older commissioners may know, that actually helped people calculate what the rate would be and help them pay the correct amount.
Who do you send that form to?
All landlords and tenants under the rent stabilization ordinance. That was what we used to do. Now is if we send a newsletter to the same folks telling them that it's 0%.
Let's see.
Do the landlords need still to, I mean, they have still collecting the, they're still collecting the registration fees that are imposed on the tenants, right? That's $7 monthly?
Yeah.
So the pass-through. Regardless of this, they still can continue collecting
Well,
that?
sure, this is totally separate.
I know, but what I mean is because it comes on the same notice, I wonder if there is a requirement to give a new notice for the next year, or it can't just continue automatically?
Now you're talking about the pass-through?
Yeah.
Well, the pass-through, like anything in collecting rent, it needs a 30-day written notice to raise that. I think typically landlords will collect that when they give the current general adjustment, because the $6 is built into that form as opposed to the $5.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to take away.
You're referring, when you say that built into the form, you're referring to the rent increase
The rent
form.
increase form
Yeah.
that the city creates, not the form that the city used to distribute for security deposit interest.
Yes.
Is there any reason why you couldn't include a calculation of the security deposit interest rent offset that each individual would be entitled to on that form?
I didn't understand your question.
Well, the form includes the pass-through fee. It calculates
Now,
Yeah.
see,
Sorry.
thank
Chris.
you, Agassi.
I didn't realize.
I'm talking about the notification that gets, the form that gets sent to a landlord and they fill it
They
out
get no
calculating.
forms. They've gotten no forms since 2012 because the interest rate is 0%.
No,
What
well,
they've gotten
I am talking about the form that gets sent, given to a landlord, that landlord then fills out and gives to their
The
tenant.
rental
So now we're
increase
talking
form.
about the
Yes.
rent increase forms and not
Yes.
security deposit interest.
Right. Well, what I'm wondering is if there's any reason that security deposit interest calculation shouldn't be included on that
They
form.
happen at different times of the year, first of all. One happens, July is when we announce the rental increase
But it goes
adjustment.
into effect September 1st.
Yeah, but we announce it in time so that the landlord can give proper notice so that it could go into effect then. This one, we don't get results until, when do we officially get the result? Right now, but is that in statute or the interest rate? When is the official date that we have to?
The announcement needs to just take place by September 1st.
For,
And that's for this calendar year, so it would
for
be
the percentage, for the interest rate.
for the interest rate. The announcement for the general adjustment has to be by July 1st.
When do
I
we,
think it's very difficult, though, to talk about both of these things at once, because it'll get very confusing, and really all that's on the agenda for tonight is security deposit interest.
when do we get the data to conclude that we have 0%? When is that data
July
available?
1st.
So we could,
It's kind of what I'm saying.
yeah.
is
It
that-
wouldn't, yeah, again, that's something we could look at. To me, again, it's confusing two issues, and people get notified of the 0%. And if interest is owed, we created a form that enabled tenants to take that interest and landlords to pay it, which made it easy to calculate. I don't know how you could get both of those things on the same piece of paper, nor do I think you'd necessarily want to, because again, it's just making more confusion.
Well, we can talk about this a little bit, but my sort of point in bringing it up is that I was, until I got on this commission, unaware. I had some general idea that I was entitled to interest on my security deposit. I thought that would come when I moved out. And I have found out that I have not been getting that deduction every year, and that my landlord is notified of the interest rate, and yet my landlord doesn't pass that information on to me. So it's upon me to claim that information from my landlord.
Wait,
All
what deduction? I'm sorry. You
the
lost.
security deposit rent offset.
So, but
There is no
you're
offset.
saying that, what do we do in a year that it's above 0%?
What we would do is at the beginning of January, we would send, end of December, beginning of January, we sent a form, and some of the commissioners who have been here since then will remember the form, which had people list down the amount of the deposit being held, the percentage, and then came up with the interest rate for that previous year. It instructed the landlords that they needed to pay it by the end of the month. It instructed both landlords and tenants that if it was not paid by the end of the month, it could be deducted beginning the February 1st rent.
So back to her original question. So in years that we get, that there is above 0% interest that is owed to the tenant, both tenant and landlord get notified.
Absolutely, and they both get the same form.
But in 0%, where there is
Both
not
they
going to
both
be,
get
they get a
notified.
newsletter.
They both get notified, but they don't get a form.
Does that help clarify a little bit?
It does, yes. I don't recall ever receiving a form, but it's good to know that it goes out, and that alleviates my
We've given out a
concerns.
form every year through 2012. We've been sending one out.
Just curious, how long have you been in your current department?
Since 2008.
So there would have been interest at some point in time.
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, actually, I think that's kind of important. That form has anything for Russian-speaking constituents saying that if you don't understand the form, please call?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other
Commissioner.
questions? All right, thank you. That brings us to our results of our 2017 study session we've all been waiting for.
Well, I heard that it was a really nice study session. And looking at the results here in front of you, that the commission, you made some choices. And so the action tonight, what we're looking for is confirmation from the commission that these are your priorities, that this looks like the outcome of the study session itself.
Can we first, unless anyone has any questions or glaring things that they see that they want to talk about, maybe we want to hear from our commissioner that wasn't there that maybe want to add anything to this, or do you want to discuss any of this, clarify, or?
I think these priorities would be relatively. Sorry. I think these priorities would be relatively in line with my own. The only thing that I was thinking about is in terms of increasing community awareness. All of the ways that are listed are sort of elective means, which is certainly fair if people want to educate themselves and they have the opportunity to do that. But I think when it comes to knowing your most significant rights, when it comes to being entitled to the interest offset on your rent, it makes sense to me to blanket all renters by mail, to explore different ways to ensure that all renters are guaranteed to receive the information, so that there's not a sort of possibility of opt-out.
So one of the things we talked about, I mean, besides the things that are specifically mentioned about increasing community awareness and community education, I think there was an understanding and agreement that anything that we do, anything that that any issues that arise, and every activity that we do also includes a education component. I mean, we're always, the goal always is to try to educate more folks about the protections in the rent stabilization ordinance. Does that kind of meet what you're, I guess?
No, I think in
other than the
general, I would,
mailing.
so in general, honestly, what I think would benefit all of the renters in this community is to receive an annual sort of summary of the, you know, the highlights and the most important things that affect their rental rates, you know, what to do if you're facing evictions, like what your landlord is entitled to do, et cetera, you know, a pamphlet or something. Or, I mean, we do reach most people by mail, maybe social media campaigns or whatever. But my only concern with these things is that, well, I think they're super useful. They shouldn't be the only, you know, these optional events shouldn't be the only means of educating people.
Chair Kurbis, I believe the department has published the brochure for kind of a tenant-landlord informational brochure. Is that's the type of material you are?
Sort of. I know that it's available online, and I
Right.
know that we do get periodic, you know, things from the city, but I haven't seen anything that's as direct as, you know, a summary of
To
some
the
of this
renters.
important information
A lot of
to renters.
I think a lot of the things that we produce, and they're really good items, are oftentimes only picked up if it's relevant to you at the moment, and they may not realize it. So I think what you're asking is a little bit more proactive, doing things we haven't already done.
Including
which
mailing.
includes more mailings.
I actually, back when I was first on this commission with Councilmember Horvath, we did kind of the top 10 rights for tenants, the top 10 rights for landlords. It was like a quick and dirty on rent stabilization that was easier, might have been easier to comprehend than going through the entire manual. So I don't know if we want to talk about bringing that back for a second look. It's been a number of years. That might be a quick, informative way to get just the basics out to people.
I also, sorry to monopolize this conversation, but as I engage in discussions with my landlord, I think that she is often surprised about what my rights are as a tenant, and sometimes what her rights are as a landlord. And so, yeah, I think it would be very beneficial to have it go both ways, and I think that that creates more understanding between parties and probably lessens the probability of dispute between them.
When does our annual report usually get finalized? I say our, you guys are really the ones that work on it.
We're a little late on it, but we're doing it now.
So when do you think, I'm just wondering, because something like that would be, we could base like the top 10 off of what your data shows on the calls that came into to rent stabilization for the last year, because your report usually includes that, how many calls you got and kind of what the top issues were, right? If I recall. Is that going to stay?
It's something similar to that, yeah.
Just so we're basing on database, you know.
It's not what I'm hearing though, so you know, I want to share something we're working on right now. I think that might be in line with what you're thinking of as well. Is just a one-pager, front and back, of the most important aspects of your rights as a tenant or your responsibilities as a landlord.
Great.
Do you mean the document that I did 5 years ago?
But we could also do, I am also hearing this, Chair, from the report itself, the annual report, is to kind of try to suss out or boil out what some of the key issues were that we heard. And I'm not sure if we have the ability to kind of capture that in that way right now. What we capture is if it's a housing-related call, or whether it's an eviction-related call, or whether it's a loss of services call. So it would be, we could give some thought. It's an interesting question, honestly. It would be some interesting data.
Is what I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
I know you probably wouldn't be able to get that detailed about what each call is coming in, but whatever has been done in the past seemed pretty informative of kind of what the issues were throughout the year. But you know, whatever we all think might be the issues as well in our own lives and our own dealings with our landlords or tenants.
I'll look into what we have now.
Anyone else have any comments about the priorities and how they're listed here?
I just wanted to reiterate my interest in having a SCEP program study session. I think that's interesting in terms of the history of how it kind of failed with West Hollywood City Council. I know personally I'm going to reach out to John Duran and other council members and try to learn more about what the concerns were. For Commissioner Buckles, so basically the SCEP program was about the city of Los Angeles kind of checking in with, yeah, you get it. So basically the history in West Hollywood was it wasn't popular because many of the privacy concerns with the citizens here. But I'm just interested in learning more about it, and I just wanted to reiterate that.
Yeah, and I think that, it's still rated very highly here, 93%. And I think my intention, especially with I think it was the two of you who expressed the most interest in it, I'd be happy to help. My only concern was that we just don't dump it on staff to prepare, that we invite somebody who's an expert in this area. We agreed that we not take action on it the first night, that we use that to gather information, and then if someone decides that they want to bring it back to the commission for a potential action, then we do that, or a potential recommendation, then we do that. And I'm happy to help on both of those if it does move to that second level.
So I'd be happy to reach out and volunteer and report back on if anybody's willing to come talk to us and educate us about it and report back at our next meeting, if that's...
Okay, and can you just work with the manager on so that we can fit it into our look ahead? And
Could I ask that we just not limit it just to the Los Angeles SCEP program, but maybe we could do a little research. I don't know if like Santa Monica and Berkeley, other cities that have strong rent control ordinances, if they have a similar program. Anybody else in California that we could kind of compare apples to apples?
Yeah, I'm happy to reach out and let you know what I find.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And as Commissioner Charity said, I actually think it would be a great topic for a study session and not for one of our regular meetings, so we can spend as much time as we want reviewing it and discussing it.
yeah, there was a discussion, I think, at the study session about that, right? Whether it would be a study session versus a meeting. So maybe you start working on it and we'll figure out how we want to present it.
It's a year before we have a study session.
But we can call a study session again, if necessary.
Okay.
All right, is there anything else on this issue? Or do we need to formally approve it, or?
The only thing that I saw missing was under the first one, periodic review RSO statutes and regulations. Gloria said she would make a notation. I'd asked that we have a discussion about the difference between when a landlord Ellis's building, if it remains vacant for 5 years, they can then re-rent that building at market rate, as opposed to when a landlord does an owner occupancy eviction in perpetuity, it goes back to the original rent. I'd like to have a discussion about that. She said she would notate that under statutes and regulations.
This is a discussion to learn more, or a discussion to look into whether that may need some adjusting, or?
Yes and yes. And actually, we have two, I'll bring it up later, but we have 2 days in September with nothing on the agenda. Perhaps we can discuss bringing that forward on one of those dates.
Do we want to report and file this, or?
Does this, Manager Noonan, does this, what Commissioner Bergstein just talked about, does that make sense to you, or do you have questions about what he's suggesting?
No, I think I understand what he wants to look at. It's Ellis and its owner occupancy evictions.
Okay. All right.
So duly noted, I'll make a note of that under the first item there, to periodically review existing RSO statutes.
But I think
Is that right?
Suggested September as well, right? That was my
Discuss
question,
that
really,
now,
is
discuss that during-
more about
yeah.
September, his suggestion, but we can wait on that, I guess, if you're willing to wait.
I think let's finish.
Okay. Is that everyone okay with that note, additional note? And any other comments, or are we ready to file this away? All right.
Report.
Okay. Gonna make a motion to.
I make a motion to report and file.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. And do we have any public comments? No one? Then we'll go into commissioner comments.
I do. I think tonight we have, I think our liaison from Public Safety is in the audience. Did you wave? Okay, because I can't see you. And I know that he had some corrections or additional information for us in regard to our discussion on public safety issues, which was 3 meetings ago. I remember receiving a email from you, Tori. Would you like to add to that? Okay. I just wanted to give you a chance. I thought it was, I'll bring it to your attention and maybe you could do it next time then. Thank you very much.
I have a couple quick things. One, I apologize, I didn't have time to make copies, but there's an interesting article in this month's Apartment Owners Association magazine about, it's called Simplifying Solar for Apartments. And the gist of the article is that if a landlord were to install solar for the building, and then it would be sub-metered out to each of the individual tenants, they could possibly recognize a fairly substantial savings in their electric bill. So I wanted to bring that up, and also I have a question for Allison on that. I know that a landlord could not unilaterally make a change to an existing tenant's lease to say, I'm going to install solar, X, Y, and Z. However, is there anything precluding a landlord and tenants to voluntarily reach an agreement?
No, the key word is unilaterally. So if the tenant and landlord agree and it's in writing, then that's acceptable.
Okay. So, and I don't have the dates, but I know the city has a number of solar pop-up events coming up in the city. Maybe they'll cover that at the same time. So solar, and then I'll bring up at this time perhaps calendaring the discussion for the difference in how Ellising and owner occupancy from perhaps one of those dates we have vacant in September, the 14th through 28th. I think a brief report from our manager about the difference between the two, and then open it for discussion among the commission, and then we could see if we wanted to go any further with that discussion.
Does anyone have a problem with that? Director Noonan, do you have a problem with September 14th or 28th being prepared for that?
I think this is one of those items that I should probably look at our staff levels and see what's best, rather than trying to commit now to one of the meetings, because this is going to take some staff time.
Do you think, though, that one of those 2 meetings will work for you, though?
At this point, I don't want to, I'd rather under-promise and over-deliver. So at this point, I'd like to say I'll hold for now, but I'll look at those. If not, we could certainly look at a meeting this year.
I think you're just...
I'm not looking, just to clarify, I'm not looking for an exhaustive report on staff. I'm not trying to burden staff. Just basically a brief statement saying that when a building is Ellised, these are the steps. This is the penalty phase, for lack of a better phrase, the 5-year program. When a landlord does an owner occupancy or a family occupancy, this is the process, and this is the, again, penalty phase. So nothing too in-depth. I'm looking more just to give us the bullet points on that, and then open it up for discussion among the commissioners.
So knowing that it's that narrow scope.
Yeah, I'm assuming that the commission, if you're having a discussion, you may have questions, you may want some questions answered. I think it's a little bit more than just a 1-page report to you on the differences between the 2 programs. So if you don't mind, I'd rather just give it some thought and then come back with a date.
All right, so let's say on August 24th, you'll come back with the date that works. Any other commissioner comments?
No, nothing.
From me, I just would like to remind the commission that I have a planned absence at our next meeting. I will be on vacation. I will be returning from Asia actually the morning of September 5th, so I will see you all at the training.
Have fun.
Safe travels.
Thank you.
All right, any other commissioner comments? And I have none. Thank you all. We'll adjourn. I think that we can adjourn now. Staff comments, I'm sorry. Any additional staff comments?
No, not at this time, thank you.
All right, then we will adjourn, or if there's a motion to adjourn, do we need that?
So moved.
So the next regular meeting of the Rent Stabilization Commission will be held on August 24th in the West Hollywood Park Public Meeting Room here in the council chambers.
Good job. Good job.